Welcome everybody to this afternoon's CERIAS security seminar. Thank you all for being here. Today is officially a reading day for the university. So if you're one of the students, thank you as well for taking some time to show up, and for everybody who's tuning in. If you haven't tuned into one of these before, we have several hundred talks by notables that are in our library and available. And this is the latest in the line of those. We're really pleased to have speaking today, Cory Doctorow, who's, well, it's hard to describe him in just a few words. He's a novelist, he's a futurist, he is a fierce advocate for issues of privacy and freedoms. He's associated with the EFF. He has a long history of saying provocative things. And that's one of the reasons we invited him to speak this afternoon. So, Cory, please take it away.
Right. Whenever someone louds my ability to say provocative things, I'm tempted to go like, yeah, up yours, but I'll forbear and carry on with the talk. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be at Purdue, to be speaking to staff students. So I'm going to talk today. I'm going to throw up some slides here. Hang on one sec. That's it. All right. So you can see the slides, I take it. I'm going to.
Yep. Yes.
Great. So I wanted to talk today about the role of technologists in both creating and solving problems with technology. And there's a salience to that question today, because there's a real contest for the posterity of the people who started what you might call the cyber rights movement, organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and the people who were early champions of the internet. And the kind of burgeoning majority report on those people is that they were blind techno-optimists, that they thought that, you know, if you could just connect everyone, everything else would be fine. And I think that's a myth. In fact, I know it's a myth because I knew those people, but I want to demonstrate to you that it was a myth. I mean, starting from this simple rational proposition that you don't start an organization like the Electronic Frontier Foundation because you think everything is going to be fine. If you think everything is going to be fine, you just go off and enjoy the ride. You start an organization like the Electronic Frontier Foundation because on the one hand, you have to be very excited about what might go right. And on the other hand, you have to have a really keen appreciation of how it might all go wrong. You know, the motto of that early cyber liberties movement, I don't think was, this is all just going to be great. It's, this is all going to be great if we don't screw it up. And if we do, it's going to be terrible. So before computing was a source of stock bubbles and wealth, it was a passion. And the people who got involved with computing got involved with it not because they were dreaming of riches, but because they couldn't help themselves. And to understand where that passion comes from, I've spent a lot of time interrogating it myself because I'm one of those people. I think it's worthwhile to consider a kind of notional journey of a programmer, that you start off your career by writing your first ever successful program. When you write a program, you express your will with sufficient precision and crispness that the computer can correctly interpret it. And then it can repeat your will effectively infinitely and effectively for free. And then when you connect that computer that your code is running on to a modem, to a network, that code can kind of slither all over the world. And anyone who has the same problem as you, or anyone who's delighted by the same things as you, can run that code. And it's a profound difference from the kind of sharing that predated code. I mean, people have made recipes for a long time and training materials for a long time. But the idea of a machine that you could imbue with your will and that would then project that will around the world. It's not like a recipe for your grandmother's perfect brownies. It's like a self-executing brownie recipe. It's like a brownie replicator that lands in the offices and basement rooms of everyone who's got one of those primitive PCs and just pumps out brownies for as long as they type run and hit return. And once you have projected your will around the world, once you found the people who want to run your code and have interests that are coterminal with your own, another amazing thing happens, which is that you discover people who are in a community with you, a community you didn't even know you needed. Communities of people who know the words for things that you felt but never been able to express, communities that know about things that you didn't even know you were interested in. And then when you discover them, you're like, how is it that I live my life without knowing about this thing that will be my passion from here on out? And all three of those activities, writing code, sharing code, and discovering communities, they could all be broadly grouped as self determination, right? Figuring out how you want to live your life and then living your life that way. And the source of all of our computer conflicts from the earliest days have some really important nexus with self-determination. So the most famous early conflict over computing was the day Richard Stallman walked into the lab at MIT, into the AI lab, and didn't like the way the printer worked and tried to open the drawer with the paper tape with the printer driver on it and found a lock on the drawer and got into an argument about whether or not he could change the program on the paper tape, and was told that that wasn't the way we do things around the AI lab at MIT anymore. And he got so angry that he invented the free software movement. And it wasn't just the locked drawer. That pattern repeats itself and repeats itself. Infamously, one day, Bill Gates got summoned to IBM to see if they were interested in buying his DOS program for their new PCs that they were making. And around that same time, he got very angry at his colleagues at the Homebrew Computer Club, who were accustomed to taking the code that they'd all written and sharing it around and altering it and sharing it with other hobbyists and improving it and just sort of sticking it all in the hopper and see what fell out, making sure not making themselves uh, uh, hostage to whatever technology decisions some other member of the club had made, but rather being able to override those decisions when they were doing their own computing. And then the first network fights were also about self determination. So before we had the web, we had Usenet, and Usenet was the thing we used to argue with each other and talk with each other on the internet. And it was a series of distributed message boards that ran over a protocol called UUCP. And the hosting for this was primarily done by a group of technologists who semi seriously, semi jokingly call themselves the Backbone Cabal. And the Backbone Cabal all worked at large research, government, and military institutions that generated phone bills every month that were thousands of pages long. And so they could bury Usenet, all those calls that their computers were making, in the phone bills, and no one would notice. But the Backbone Cabal had a pretty rational fear, which was that someday their bosses would figure out what they were doing, or more worryingly, someone in Congress, which ultimately funded a lot of this stuff, would figure out what they were doing. And if there was stuff going on Usenet beyond frivolous arguments about Star Trek or sharing tips about how to groom your cat, if there was pornography or pirated software or other material that might excite the passions of someone on Congress looking for something to grandstand on, that would be the end of the whole project. And so the Backbone Cabal had a funny way of running itself. Whenever someone wanted to add a new discussion group to Usenet, they would hold a vote. And if the vote was found a majority of votes in favor of starting that group, it was started, unless the Backbone Cabal didn't want it, in which case they would veto it. And there was a cookery enthusiast who wanted a cookery group, and he wanted it under the rec hierarchy for a recreational activity. And the Backbone Cabal, in the manner of all people who exercise power without accountability, decided that not only were they going to exercise their veto to keep pornography off of their network, they were also going to exercise their veto to ensure that cookery only went under the talk category and not the recreational category. And this kicked off a fight that was so intense that it resulted in John Gilmore and a few friends founding an alternative set of infrastructure to Usenet called the alt hierarchy, where anyone could start any news group without the Backbone Cabal interfering. And within a year or two, it was larger than all of Usenet. It had been eclipsed by the Spite Usenet that had been built. And the very first news group in that Spite Usenet was alt.gourmand, a cookery group that went where the person who wanted to put it, so that self-determination could be exercised. Now, in the years since those fights, some of the worst nightmares of those early digital activists have come to pass. We have got total penetration of technology, and we have centralization, surveillance, and manipulation to go with it. How was it that these early digital freedom activists were dealt such a stinging defeat? What was their blind spot? How did they miss that dystopia was a possible outcome of putting a computer first on every desk and then in every pocket? And I don't think they missed it at all. I think they absolutely appreciated that dystopia was one of the possible outcomes, maybe even a likely one, and one that they were very exercised about and determined to stave off. But they did have a blind spot, and that blind spot was monopoly. And I want to explain how it is technologists could have mistaken technology for an intrinsically competitive industry where there would be lots of choice and where firms that exercised their authority unwisely to the detriment of their users would find themselves put out of business. So the early commercial internet was very dynamic. Every year in those early years, companies that had been soaring high, even companies that were household names in the technology world, would be toppled by upstarts. And then those upstarts would be toppled themselves a year or two later, one after another after another. It seemed like there was this dynamism in the network that was intrinsic somehow to technology. And it's true that technology has some intrinsic dynamism built into it, thanks to some factors I'll talk about a little later. But the main thing that contributed to the dynamism of technology in those early days was not the formal characteristics of technology, not Turing completeness and underlying compatibility. It was the Department of Justice. So I'm 49 years old. I got my first Apple II Plus in 1979 when I was 8 years old. And in 1983, I got a modem and I got online. And the reason I got a modem, the reason I got online, the reason that there were BBSs popping up all over the world, particularly in North America, particularly in the United States, and the reason that modems got really cheap was that AT&T had been broken up in 1982. And AT&T's major project prior to 1982 was keeping people from having modems because telecoms operators are addicted to something you might call the urinary tract infection business model. That's the idea where instead of value flowing in a nice healthy gush, it comes out in a painful dribble. So if you want to make a long distance call, that'll cost you something. Hell, if you want caller ID, if you want to know who's calling you before you pick up the phone, that'll cost you something too. Imagine if email worked like caller ID, where you could open the message and read it, but if you wanted to find out who it was from or see the subject line before you opened it, you'd have to pay your email provider $2.95 a month for emailer ID. The carriers understood correctly that if you were a if we switched to an all networked version of this where services were deployed at the edge instead of in the middle of the network, that they would lose the ability to control the value that was flowing over the network. And so they had spent 20 years trying to fight it. They finally lost the fight when they got broken up in 1982. Modems proliferated, BBSs proliferated, and then in 1984, whoops, one slide too far. In 1984, IBM launched the first PC, the first IBM PC. And the IBM PC was a remarkable piece of technology, not just because it used commodity components, but because IBM didn't provide an operating system for it. Instead, they sourced the operating system from Bill Gates, that guy who wrote the Homebrew Computer Club letter. And the reason IBM did that is they had spent 12 years in antitrust hell being threatened with a breakup by the DOJ. And during those 12 years, IBM's lawyers spent more money every single year than the entire DOJ spent on all of its antitrust actions. They called it Antitrust's Vietnam, this quagmire that they had been sunk in, that they were finally sprung from after the breakup of AT&T. Basically, Reagan's DOJ said, we're going to do one, but not both of America's two technology giant monopolists, and it'll be AT&T, not IBM. So IBM was given a stay of execution, but they knew that one of the things that had made the DOJ exceptionally angry with them was using hardware to get a software monopoly. And so they said, you know what, we're not even going to try to get a software monopoly. We're going to let Microsoft provide the software for our hardware. And so before I knew it, there were these computers all over the place that had an operating system run on them that didn't come from IBM. It came from literally like a couple of guys, Paul Allen and Bill Gates. And it wasn't just that the PCs proliferated, the PC clones proliferated too. And the reason the PC clones proliferated is that a company called Phoenix, still in business today, still a powerhouse, hired this guy named Tom Jennings. Now, Tom had run an alternative to Usenet called FidoNet. He was a young, queer, anarchist technologist and hardware wizard. He lives about 4 miles from me here in Los Angeles, a wonderful guy. And they asked Tom to reverse engineer the IBM PC ROM, which he dutifully did for them. They got some Texas Instruments programmers to re-implement it on Intel Silicon so that no one could accuse them of stealing any Intel microcode. And then they sold that to Dell and Gateway and Compaq and all of these companies that sprung up all out of nowhere, right? And before you knew it, they were giant companies. In fact, they went on to buy some of the largest companies in the field. You know, Digital was bought out by Compaq. This is a remarkable thing. This would be like, oh, I don't know, IBM being bought out by your nephew, right? It was a really spectacular upset to live through. And of course, Microsoft, well, you know, they recapitulated their own history. They grew and they grew and they became a monopolist just like IBM had been. And the lesson that they took from IBM was not if you're a monopolist, the DOJ will come after you, but rather if you're a monopolist, you might get to do it for 70 or 80 years before the DOJ comes and smacks you down. And so they began to use the kinds of dirty tricks against Netscape that had made IBM such a pariah among antitrust enforcers in the US. And before you knew it, they were stuck with their own antitrust investigation. That went on for 7 years, and they escaped with their lives, right? They were not broken up. But like IBM, they learned an important lesson from that antitrust investigation, which is to just like not attract the attention of the FTC antitrust enforcers if you can help it. And so when a couple of guys in Silicon Valley started a company called Google, rather than giving them the Netscape treatment, they gave them the IBM treatment. They just let them proceed. They let them flourish. And so for me, sitting there, callow youth, watching computers spring up and change and watching startups go from 0 to 60 and then fall as a new startup enters the market, it felt like we had found something perfect. That we had found a kind of market where with very little capital, just your smarts and your ability to code, you could gain access to a global audience, and that global audience would have low switching costs, a market where the best ideas could turn into companies and where those companies could find customers and change the world. But what we didn't realize was that the anti-monopoly law that made all this possible had been gut shot in the 1980s, and it was bleeding out. And it had been gut shot and it was bleeding out because of this guy, Robert Bork. Robert Bork, for the older people in the audience, you'll remember him mostly, I think, as the guy who tried to become a Supreme Court justice, but the Senate wouldn't confirm him because of the crimes he committed when he was Nixon's Solicitor General. But despite the fact that Robert Bork was denied a Supreme Court seat, he became incredibly influential and arguably more powerful than he would have been on the Supreme Court. He became a kind of court sorcerer to the Reagan cabinet, and he promulgated a new theory of monopoly. Whereas antitrust enforcers before this had broken up monopolies because they thought monopolies were bad per se, that concentrating power into a few hands produced bad outcomes that should be guarded against. Bork said that we should only break up monopolies, we should only take action against them, we should only prevent them from forming when we could show that they would do some harm to consumer welfare. And Bork defined consumer welfare primarily as prices rising as a direct result of monopoly, and to prove that prices rise as a direct result of monopoly or would rise as a direct result of monopoly, you had to use these abstruse economic models that Bork and a few of his peers at the University of Chicago had invented and that nobody else in the world really understood. And this moved the question of monopoly out of the political realm where everyone got an opinion into this highly technical realm, this mathematical realm, this specialized mathematical realm, where whenever anyone wanted to know whether a company should be broken up because prices had gone up after it did something monopolistic, would have to go and consult with the sorcerers, and they would slaughter an ox, right? They'd build a model and they would read its guts and they would pronounce that in those guts they had determined that the price rise could not be attributed to monopoly and therefore the monopoly should be allowed to continue. Now, these theories were incredibly popular with rich people because it let them get a lot richer by forming monopolies. And those rich people funded the promulgation of these theories. They created the MAN seminars, which were these junkets in Florida every summer for federal judges. 40% of the federal bench went to these seminars to be re-educated about when they should forbear and enforcing antitrust laws. They funded law schools, economics departments, think tanks, and they promulgated these ideas all around the world, in the UK under Thatcher, Germany under Helmut Kohl, Canada under Brian Mulroney, through Latin America, through the Operation Condor countries, where military juntas had taken hold. And this became the doctrine all around the world. And it meant that all of the things that we used to prohibit were now presumptively permitted. So companies were no longer banned from merging with major competitors. They were no longer banned from snapping up a nascent competitor before it could grow to become a threat. And they were no longer banned from creating vertical monopolies. Now, the theory of why tech became so monopolized leans very hard on exotic theories like network effects, where one fax machine is useless, two fax machines are useful, three fax machines twice as useful as that, and so on, scaling at order n squared. But a close look at how the companies grew reveals another explanation for why they grew. They grew because we stopped enforcing antitrust law. Instead, they grew through Moneyball, through buying all their potential competitors or merging with them. So, a good illustrative example is Google and the Google graveyard. Google is a 1.5 product company, a company that made one and a half successful in house products. They made a search engine that's very, very good, and they made a pretty good Hotmail clone. And everything else that they've made in house failed. And everything that they've done that's successful came from a company they acquired. If Google had been playing under the rules that we had before Robert Bork and Ronald Reagan, they wouldn't have been allowed to buy their ad tech companies or YouTube or Android. They would have been a very different firm indeed. Now, network effects are real. The Bell system did have a network effect. But with tech, network effects are different because of something called competitive compatibility, which is a subset of interoperability. Competitive compatibility is the right not just to interoperate with the consent of someone who's made a product or service, but against their wishes. So Bell was a great enemy of competitive compatibility. They famously asserted the right to decide what you could connect to the Bell network, which phones could be plugged into a phone jack, and even which things could be attached to a phone. Those powers started to slip away when they lost some celebrated lawsuits like the Hushaphone lawsuit. Hushaphone was a suit over a little device, a cup, a plastic cup that fit over the mouthpiece of your phone so that your voice would be muffled while you spoke into it and people couldn't read your lips while you spoke into your phone. And Bell argued that the Hushaphone would endanger public safety, that by mechanically coupling a third-party device to a terminal in their network, that the entire network, which also provided things like police services, fire services, public safety, and security, that entire network would be in danger by your plastic cup over the mouthpiece of your phone. Um, in in the Bell system, they eventually lost those rights, and when they did, it meant that there was a huge blossoming of new technologies that could be connected to the network and new ways that people could use them. Not just modems, but also answering machines and PBXs, switchboards, and so on. That really altered the way that Americans talk to one another and the way that American enterprise and the way that American technologists were able to do things in the world. Now, competitive compatibility has a very honorable history within the tech world itself. So think about the iWork suite. Before 1905 or 2005, rather, when the iWork suite launched. Um, oh, someone says they still see the Newsweek and Time cover slide. Can someone confirm whether you're seeing the new slide, the iWork suite slide?
Yeah, we see it.
Oh, very good. Thank you. So before 2005, people who wanted to use the Mac had a problem. And so Apple had a problem. And that problem was that there was no reliable way to read and write Microsoft Office files. There was a version of Word for the Mac at this point and Excel for the Mac, but it was to use a really like a generous term, it was cursed. If you were the sole Mac user in a Windows environment and someone sent you a Word file and you had the misfortune to open and save that Word file, not only could none of your Windows compatriots ever read that file in all likelihood, there was a pretty good chance you wouldn't be able to read that file again either. It was really low quality software, uh, possibly the worst software Microsoft ever wrote. I was a network administrator and CIO back then. I had to support a lot of heterogeneous environments, and it was the bane of my existence. And Steve Jobs solved this problem. And he solved the problem not by going on bended knee to Gates and saying, will you make me a better version of Mac Office? Instead, he asked some of his engineers to do what Tom Jennings had done with the PC-ROM, to reverse engineer the Office suite and make compatible products, the iWork suite, so that anyone could read and write Microsoft files without using Microsoft's software. It wasn't just Steve Jobs and Apple. Um, Lexmark made the most successful laser printers at one point. They were a division of IBM. And like many printer companies, they decided to gouge their customers on consumables. So they charged a fantastic premium on the cartridges, which were, after all, just filled with powdered carbon. And the prices that they charged for that powdered carbon, it might have well have been diamonds. And so along came a little country, a company called Static Controls, based in Taiwan. They reverse engineered the chip that Lexmark used to detect whether you had refilled your cartridge. It was a little EEPROM, I believe, with 12 bytes of main memory, and it ran a program that, if you queried it, said "I am full" until it ran out of ink, and then if you queried it, it said "I am empty," even if you refilled it. Reverse engineering a 12-byte program wasn't all that difficult, and Static Controls won a lawsuit that Lexmark brought against them for building this device. And now Static Controls owns Lexmark. And so that was the kind of thing that you see enabled with competitive compatibility. And it wasn't just Lexmark, and it wasn't just the Mac. It was also network services. When Zuckerberg launched Facebook and made it available to the wider public, expanded it beyond academic users, he had a really serious problem, which is that everyone in the world who wanted to use social media already had an account on a rival service called MySpace that was owned by the world's most rapacious, vicious billionaire, Rupert Murdoch. And he wasn't going to let his users go without a fight. And Facebook was arguably a lot better than MySpace. Ironically, one of the things that was better about Facebook in those days was that they were more respecting of your privacy. They didn't allow Google to crawl it. They had a lot of tools that allowed you to create private groups and so on. But they had a really serious downside for people who were already using MySpace, which is that none of your friends were using Facebook yet. And so everyone was mutually holding each other hostage. And what that meant was that anyone who left MySpace for Facebook would have a better service and no one to use it with. And so people were stuck. And so Zuckerberg's company made a bot. And you gave that bot your login credentials. It would visit MySpace on your behalf, scrape your waiting email, put it in your Facebook inbox, let you reply to it, and push it back out to MySpace. And in that one stroke, the network effect advantage, the walled garden that Facebook had built, was turned on its head. It became a feedlot. It became a neatly organized array of potential customers for a superior service that outdid it. Now, when you look at the history of any of today's big tech giants, you see this competitive compatibility, this permissionless innovation in its history. But today, all of that stuff is off limits thanks to the lobbying of the big tech companies. So, between software patents, software copyrights, anti circumvention rules that prohibit bypassing a means of access control, the terms of service, enforceable terms of service, and the novel sui generis rights that are being fought over in the courts, like Oracle's bid to make APIs copyrightable. You see the foreclosure of competitive compatibility. You see this new regime where, if you choose your technology and your law carefully, you can design a product that can't be used in ways that you disfavor. You can design a product where using it in ways that you disfavor amount to felony contempt of business model. After all, Section 12.1 of the DMCA, the law that prohibits circumventing a copyright control, provides for a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine for a first offense. So all of this stuff gets lumped under something called IP, or intellectual property. And the free culture, free software movement really doesn't like the term IP. They say it's disingenuous, that none of this stuff is really property, that trademark is nothing like copyright, and copyright is nothing like patent. And why are we grouping all of these together anyway? But I think that there is, and they argue that we should use a different term for IP. They say that we should call them, they say that we should call it authors' monopolies. They say that that's the term that we used to use before copyright came along or before IP came along. We called these monopolies because they were government granted monopolies, and we should acknowledge what their true role is. But as this litany of ways that we've seen competitive compatibility foreclosed upon shows us, IP does have a very precise technical meaning in the tech industry. IP is any rule or law that allows a commercial firm to control the conduct of its competitors, its critics, and its customers. So those tools are incredibly powerful, and when you fuse them with an author's monopoly, when you take the market monopoly that we see firms getting because of Robert Bork's forbearance and the ability to buy your competitors or merge with them or create vertical monopolies, and you infuse authors' monopolies into them, when you add IP, patents or copyrights or terms of service, you get something that is far more durable than an author's monopoly or a market monopoly. You get a market monopoly that the government will defend in the name of defending authors' monopolies. So, in other words, if you are Universal Music and you have a monopoly on all, sort of two-thirds of the popular music catalog, that might be a source of concern for your general counsel. You might worry that someday you'll attract antitrust scrutiny and be forced to divest yourself of some of the divisions that you've acquired. But if somebody wants to escape your contracting terms and make their own music, their own hip hop that remixes the stuff that's in your catalog, and they choose not to take a license because doing so means signing your contract, and your contract is extraordinarily abusive because you have a monopoly, then the fact that they sample your music without your permission allows you to ask the government to punish them for doing it, for making your shareholders sad. This is a novel thing on the earth where you have authors monopolies and market monopolies fused together in ways that allow large firms to suborn the state to serve their parochial commercial interests. And of interest to this group might be the way that these authors monopolies fused with market monopolies allow firms to control their competitors, because under section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986, a cybersecurity bill, and under other things that we describe as IP, we have seen independent security researchers threatened and even shut down, and in one case dragged off a stage at a security conference by the FBI and arrested for bypassing copyright controls, for ignoring terms of service, and doing the other normal things that security researchers do in order to discover defects in products that people relied on, but that the firms didn't want their customers to know about, because who wants their customers to know about the stupid mistakes that they have made? So I started saying that the early internet boosters were not blind to the peril of technology, but maybe they were just a little. After all, once all that money started sloshing around, then if you could convince yourself that the tech was an unchecked force for good, you might be able to get some of that money even if you're compromising your principles. The myth of two guys in a garage who could topple billion-dollar giants and become billionaires themselves fired a lot of techies' imaginations, but it also sidelined a lot of their consciences. Now, for better or for worse, those days are behind us. Thanks to monopolization, the lines of business that the largest tech firms are in, and even the lines that are adjacent to them, are described by investors as the kill zone, and no one will invest in them despite the fact that these large firms are experiencing double-digit growth year on year, and reaping billions of dollars in profits, profits that endure even through the calamitous pandemic. So, what that means is that the ambitions of technologists who go to Silicon Valley and other tech centers have shrunk from starting a company in a garage that changes the world, makes a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs used to say, to getting a job with a really good 401k where there's kombucha on tap and you get free massages on Wednesdays. And liberated from the fear of losing their customers to competitors, tech has pivoted. Now it's in the business of locking in, manipulating, and abusing its users. Now, the workers who write that code, the workers who spend every hour that God sends writing code to take away your autonomy, they're technologists. They're technologists who discovered their passion for the field when they felt the thrill of self determination that arises when you make code share it in a network, and discover a community. And I think that this is an important fracture line. For the last 2 years, we have seen a rising tide of tech worker walkouts, tech worker solidarity movements with other workers within tech firms like contractors or warehouse workers at Amazon, and of refusals to build certain kinds of technology on the grounds that it is too ripe for misuse. No tech for ICE, anti-facial recognition movements, the walkout over Google building a censored Chinese search engine, or over providing artificial intelligence machine learning classifiers to the US drone program. And it's interesting because it's tempting to compare these people to Robert Oppenheimer, who was, after all, a genius and also a great force for moral discourse within technology. Oppenheimer was a brilliant physicist and a brilliant manager. And there were a lot of brilliant physicists in his day, and there were a lot of brilliant managers in his day, but there weren't a lot of brilliant physicists who were also brilliant managers. And so that's why he ended up running the Manhattan Project to make the first nuclear bomb. And it was partway through the first field deployment of the nuclear bomb that Robert Oppenheimer started to have regrets. After the first trial of the nuclear bomb in Los Alamos, he very famously said, turned away from it and quoted the Bhagavad Gita, and he said, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And he spent the rest of his career publicly repudiating the use of atoms and atomic bombs for war. He was interested in things like the Project Orion, sending spaceships into deep space with nukes, but not dropping them on cities anymore. And it was so intense that when he was summoned to the president's office so that he could be congratulated on his role in making the bomb, he instead told the president that he regretted it, and the president threw him out and told his assistant never to let, quote, "that asshole in here again." So I have an interest in this because of something I did. I wrote a novel that came out in 2008 called Little Brother, and it's a book about kids who seize the means of computation and fight back against technological oppression. And it's kind of a how-to book. It's a crypto primer disguised as a young adult novel. And lots of people have read that book. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's been translated into dozens of languages, adapted in many ways. And I've lost track of the number of security professionals, cryptographers, cyber lawyers, human rights activists who've come up to me and said, I read that book and it changed the way I thought about technology. And that's why I do what I do today. And it's a source of enormous pride. It was even before I went and saw Citizen 4, the Edward Snowden documentary, and realized that Snowden had taken a copy of its sequel, Homeland, with him when he went into hiding in Hong Kong and then into exile in Russia. And although I had reached a kind of force of technologists who wanted to make tech a force for good, I also realized that there was another cohort of technologists who were late stage Oppenheimers, right? They were coming at it too late. They were regretting their work after they built it and not before. And so last autumn rather, I published this book, Attack Surface, which is a book about a young woman who confronts the moral valence of her work as a surveillance contractor, regrets it, and dedicates herself to remediating the harm. And it's a book about having a reckoning. It's an adult novel, not because it's got sex in it. It doesn't have any sex in it. The young adult novels have sex in it because teenagers think about sex all the time. The older you get, the less it's on your mind and the less significant it is to you. It's an adult novel because it's about moral reckonings, and most teenagers don't need moral reckonings, and even the ones that do are probably unlikely to have them until they've got a few miles under them. So I find this to be an urgent project, this project of addressing people who are caught in this contradiction, because those authors' monopolies are now available for every kind of technology, every kind of device, not just general purpose computers, but anything with an embedded system in it. And what that means is that all of the technologies in your life can now be designed to be adverse to you, to work against your interests, and that the state will intervene to defend the manufacturer against you if you try to reconfigure them so that they act for you and not for some distant firm's shareholders. Um, and worse than that, these computers that live in our embedded systems, they're not just a technology that binds us, they're a technology that watches us. And if we violate the rules that the manufacturer set down, they are liable to contact the manufacturer and snitch on us. And so this is a new kind of Orwellian vision of technology one that frankly scares the pants off of me. Um, so, what are we going to do about all this stuff? How are we going to resolve this? What's the theory of change? The copyright scholar James Boyle, who's at Duke University, says that before the coining of the term ecology in the early 1970s, there were people who cared about ecological issues, but they didn't know that they were on the same side. You know, if you liked owls and I liked the ozone layer, it wasn't immediately apparent that you and I were fighting the same cause. But the term ecology turned 1,000 issues into one movement with 1,000 ways to get involved in it. And we are living in a moment in which we could conceivably rebalance our relationship with large firms, not in spite of the fact that there are monopolies everywhere, but because there are monopolies everywhere. People come to harm because of monopolies, not just in the tech sphere. You know, the US has one major glass bottle manufacturer left in it. It's one of the reasons we struggled so hard to distribute vaccines to people. There's only one eyeglass manufacturer of any size left. They also own the largest lens manufacturer, which makes more than half of the lenses in the world, and every major eyewear retailer you've ever heard of, from Lens Crafters to Sears Optical to Sunglass Hut, and also the largest eyewear insurer. And they've raised the price of glasses 1,000% over 10 years. Although our friends at the University of Chicago will assure you that the glasses went up in price for reasons completely unrelated to monopoly, and and if we disagree, they will make a model that proves it. There are people who are angry because professional wrestling has dwindled to a single league, and they've reclassified all of their workers as contractors, taken away their health care, and now those wrestlers that those kids grew up loving are begging for pennies on GoFundMe so they can die with dignity of their work-related injuries that are uninsured. And then there's the big four accounting firms, the insurance firms, the big three studios, the one movie theater, the one spirits company, the two beer companies, and so on, up and down the dial. And when these companies achieve monopolies, they distort our policy and they hurt us with impunity. If we can reach out to those people, we can make a difference, right? We can gather all those people together into a political force the way the ecology movement did. And we can say, look, I'm not all that exercised about professional wrestling, but I am exercised about monopolies. And if you will fight monopolies in tech, I'll fight them in wrestling alongside of you. Above all, we need to get past the story. The reason that technology became monopolized is that it's run by evil super geniuses. Ultimately, the lesson of monopolization across all these sectors is that we got monopolies because it was monopolizing time, and that those technology super geniuses, they're just three sociopaths in a trench coat. And that's my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a lot of material. And if people have questions, please post them in the Q&A. We have many comments on the chats, but I'm not seeing any questions popping up yet.
Ah, yeah, I see them too.
We'll give people a few moments here.
Obviously, when you say things that are as uncontroversial and obvious as that, it's common for there to be no questions. Everyone just nods and says, "Yeah, no, that's what I thought all along."
There's one.
Yeah,
There's
here they
two.
go. Right. So, what's the best to counter tech monopolies? So, I think that we're seeing some really important. This is Ralph's question, Ralph Poor. Thank you for your question, Ralph. I think we're seeing some really good initiatives towards fighting tech monopolies, and there are both technical and non-technical remedies. And it's important not to take away from my talk that although tech became monopolized due to the same forces that allowed monopolies to flourish elsewhere, namely forbearance on anti-monopoly enforcement, that tech is not exactly the same as all these other industries. You know, think about the railroad. The railroad creates monopolies as well, but the railroad does not have this compatibility dimension to it that digital technology does. In Australia in the 19th century, would-be rail barons all laid their rail at different gauges so that they could create monopolies. And 150 years later, this is a very serious problem. They call it the middle gauge muddle. And for 150 years, they've tried to resolve it with interoperability. They've tried 200 to 300 different kinds of rail car that can drop a set of wheels and retract a set of wheels and hop onto a new set of tracks. After 150 years and a couple hundred designs, they're just tearing up the rail and laying new rail because that turns out to be the most effective and efficient way to do it. Now, that's not the case with computers. right? With computers, if you have some code that's locked in some silo, you stick it in a VM, or you write a compatibility layer, or you reverse engineer the file format. You don't just throw away the computer. You don't throw away the idea of computing. You don't reconstruct your data from scratch, right? This is the cool and amazing and terrifying thing about information security, is that this compatibility is always there. If we could make a program that, or a computing substrate that was mostly Turing complete but not totally Turing complete, we wouldn't have malware that could run in printers, because we could make a printer that only ran printing commands and not general purpose computing commands that allowed it to open a reverse shell through your firewall, and then probe all the machines on your LAN for 0 days, and then infiltrate them, and then allow the bot master to exfiltrate all the data. So that compatibility is the source of enormously powerful antitrust remedies, some that will work faster than the traditional antitrust remedies of blocking mergers and unwinding mergers. Um, for example, if we decide that a company is abusing its monopoly on app stores, we might demand that they allow third parties to operate app stores. A bill to that effect just failed in the North Dakota legislature. No, sorry, the Wyoming legislature, Wyoming, I believe. Either North Dakota or Wyoming. I beg your pardon. I should have known that off the tip. But today it failed in the legislature. In the European Union, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act make just that mandate, along with many other mandates that come along with it. You could imagine that a state might enact a legislation that says that it's against public policy for certain contracting terms to be in terms of service, like a contracting term that forbade reverse engineering for security research or for accessibility or for other purposes. And those contracting terms would simply become null as a matter of state law. This is why, for example, in California, non-compete clauses aren't enforceable. California law prohibits them, so you can put them in a contract, but can't enforce that contract in California. It's pretty good news for Silicon Valley, because it meant that when Robert Shockley, who started Fairchild, the first Silicon Valley company, went bananas and decided to stop trying to make microchips and instead spend all of his Nobel Prize money paying people of color to get sterilized because he became a eugenicist, that his 8 early employees didn't have to hang around with this odious troll, and instead could leave and found Intel without having to worry about non-competes. So we could impose limits on contracting terms that would clean up terms of service rather a lot. We could reform the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to permit reverse engineering and bypassing technical protection measures for beneficial purposes, or when there's no nexus with a copyright infringement. Or we could bind companies that are caught with their hands in the cookie jar, companies caught violating the law. We could say that as a condition of settling those claims, they would have to forbear, they would have to eschew access to that. Or we might say, as a procurement guideline at our state or federal level, that we won't procure any devices unless the manufacturer signs a binding covenant not to enforce these rules that allow them to block interoperability. This is actually a very old tradition in procurement. It goes all the way back to the Civil War, when the Union Army said that they would only buy guns if they could second source parts and ammunition for those guns, because they didn't want to be dependent on a single manufacturer for it. So imagine if your school district said, yeah, we're going to buy iPads, but we're going to demand the right to sideload on them, because if Apple has a dispute with the company that makes the ed tech that we use for 50,000 students, we don't want to just be left out hanging out there. And this is a real possibility. Apple removed Fortnite like a couple of months ago, so there's plenty of reason to believe that this might happen again. And why should we, as taxpayers who support a school district, tolerate them buying a device that could be effectively bricked by the manufacturer? They might also say that before they procure Google Classroom, they're going to secure a binding promise from Google that they won't block interoperators who make new tools that allow you to better integrate Google Classroom with rivals products, or do security audits, or add extra privacy layers, or what have you. So all of those things are available to us, and a lot of them work a lot faster than mere antitrust, right? Lawsuits take a long time. Recall IBM and antitrust's Vietnam. So it's conceivable that we could get there a lot faster through these other remedies. And then, more generally, we could unwind all the mergers that were undertaken under false pretenses. So Google promised when they bought their ad tech companies and YouTube, that they wouldn't mine data from across multiple Google services to build a single profile that could be used by their ad tech companies. And then they broke their promise, right? In the European Union, Facebook said that they would promise not to merge the backends of WhatsApp and Instagram with Facebook Messenger, and they lied. And if you obtain a merger under false pretenses, you should have to unwind the merger. That should be the remedy, not in spite of the fact that it's a very expensive and difficult remedy, but because of it. As Camus said, sometimes you have to execute an admiral to encourage the others, right? We should send a message to everyone who undertakes a merger on false pretenses that they're not allowed, that they can't keep the company that they bought. And if it costs them billions of dollars or destroys the company that they bought, tough noogies. You shouldn't have lied, right? You shouldn't get to hang on to something you attained through fraudulent means. And then we can block new mergers. There's always new mergers underway. The acqui-hire is this weird toxic thing that's come out of Silicon Valley, where because of the kill zone, if you do a cool startup, you don't get to take that startup public or make a product with it. Really, your cool startup exists as a postgraduate project that you use to impress recruiters from big tech companies. Your VCs aren't really VCs, they're headhunters. The notional purchase of your shares isn't really a purchase of shares. It's a hiring bonus for you and a finder's fee for your VC. And we can block those mergers. If we block those mergers, VCs will fund different kinds of companies. And if they fund different kinds of companies, we'll get products that actually compete with the big tech companies. So that's what I think. Let's look at some of these other questions here. What is the role of GPL? I like this. James Harney. What is the role of GPL licensed software and potential solutions to tech monopolies? So one of the things that's interesting about GPL is that it constitutes a kind of Ulysses pact. So those of you who remember your Greek mythology or who read the Odyssey will know that Ulysses was a hacker. So there was like an established protocol for sailing through the sea of the sirens, who were these fish women who, when they sang, made you jump into the sea and then they would devour you. And the accepted protocol for that was to fill your ears with wax so that you couldn't hear the siren song. But Ulysses, being a hacker, wanted to find a better way because he wanted to hear the song. He figured it was probably pretty cool. And so he lashed himself to the mast. And when he was lashed to the mast, he could hear the song, but he couldn't jump in the sea. Not because he didn't want to, and not because he wasn't weak and vulnerable, but because he understood that that moment of weakness was coming up and he planned for it. It's the same reason you throw away your Oreos the night you go on a diet. Not because you're immune to temptation, but because you have the maturity to anticipate temptation and to take yourself out of temptation's way. And the GPL is a Ulysses pact in the sense that it is an irrevocable license. So once you apply the GPL to your code, you pre-commit to permitting all comers to build new things with your code. And nothing can cause you to take that license back out, not even if you want to. If your investors show up and they say, look, you're running out of money, you're not going to be able to make payroll this week. We've changed our mind about this GPL thing. If you don't take the GPL off your code, we're going to shut your business down, and all those friends that you convinced to quit their good jobs and risk their kids' college funds, they're going to lose their jobs and maybe end up homeless. Even then, you can't say, all right, I'm going to take the GPL off my code. It's irrevocable. Nothing can pressurize you into doing it. And so there are lots of people who found companies and build technologies with the best of intention. And then either they find themselves in a moment of weakness, or they find themselves absent and someone who's got different ethics or morals to them is in charge of their technology. I had a call with some Apple people a little while ago who were talking with me about how Apple's controls are used in service primarily to their users, which I think is true, except in China. But I said, Jeff Bezos just retired. What if Tim Cook has a heart attack and Jeff Bezos decides to come out of retirement after the board begs and pleads, and he's the CEO of Apple? Do you think that he'll use that power that Apple has arrogated to itself as wisely as Tim Cook did? And they both got this very ashen look when I said that. And so the GPL, by forming this kind of pre-commitment, is a means of safeguarding not just for against your own future weakness and frailty, but against the weakness or venality of people who come after you. And so in that regard is very good. It is insufficient. As we've seen, the cloud is not up to snuff when it comes to GPL, or GPL is not up to snuff when it comes to the cloud. Benjamin Mako Hill gave an excellent 2018 presentation at Libre Planet, one of the keynotes, where he said that open source is what the rest of us got. All of us can see the code that backstops Google's cloud or Amazon's cloud. It's all sitting there on GitHub. We can alter that software. We can commit improvements to that software and push them into the GitHub instance. What we can't do is alter how the cloud works. That software freedom, as distinct from the open source, that software freedom is only owned by the monopolists who run cloud companies. And so those people who said that open source and its stress of instrumental benefits would be a good proxy for free software and its stress on ethical benefits were, I think, proven wrong. That it's entirely possible to have the mechanical underlying mechanisms of open source intact without the software freedom that underpin them and that they were created in the name of. I'm going to answer one more question because we've got 2.5 minutes left and I have another call to get on. Privacy is an illusion. This is from George Jarvis. Can true privacy be realized given how government is using technology monopolies as surrogates to circumvent them? And if somebody could get privacy, wouldn't the level be correlated to being a terrorist? Wouldn't it make you look like a terrorist if you took steps to defend your privacy? So I think privacy, first of all, it needs to be understood as not secrecy. Privacy is not that nobody else knows your business. Privacy is that you get to decide who knows your business. And so it's true that if you wanted to keep things secret, it's really hard. But if you want to decide who you share stuff with, it's actually pretty straightforward. We have more privacy primitives at our disposal than anyone in the history of the world, right? I mean, kings used to shave messengers' heads and tattoo messages on their scalp and wait for their hair to grow out and send them across the Roman Empire to deliver the message. Now, you take your pocket distraction rectangle and you click the button on it and it takes a picture, and in an eye blink it's encrypted so thoroughly that if all the hydrogen and the atoms in the universe were computers and they did nothing until the end of the universe but try and guess the key, that we would run out of universe like a long time before we ran out of possible keys. And so we have many options for privacy that weren't there before. People may be bad judges of when they should have privacy and when they shouldn't. People might allow other people to know stuff that they come to regret, or they might keep secrets from people who could help them. Speaking as the father of a 13-year-old, I'm here to tell you that kids really appreciate their need to have privacy, but they fail to understand who they need privacy from. My kid is 13 and has already had issues where she shared stuff online with friends that turned out not to be wisely shared. And in part, the reason that it was as bad as it was is that she took measures to stop me from knowing about it because she lacks the context to understand that I'm on her side and that her friends aren't necessarily on her side, or at least not as reliably as I am. And so people might make unwise choices about privacy, but privacy is very important. Privacy is how it is that we got to a place where we were able to make social change, social progress. Within living memory, like there are people alive today who remember when so-called interracial marriage was a crime. There are people alive today who remember when being gay was a crime. There are people alive today, everyone on this call, who remember when smoking marijuana was a crime. It's not where I am here in California. I can't because I'm an immigrant and it's a federally scheduled substance, but my American neighbors can, and I can smell it over the fence of an evening. And the way that we got from there to here was not spontaneous. It took effort. People who had secrets about themselves, people who had things about themselves that were not socially acceptable, were able to keep those secrets and then tell other people about them, share them, right? Be private at the time and manner of their choosing. And people were able to wait until they were away for a fishing weekend with their dad to come out as being queer, or to wait until they were in company with other people whose judgment they trusted to talk about their relationship with someone who was racialized in a different way to themselves. And by building those alliances with people who had a different set of risks of social sanction, people who didn't have secrets that they were keeping from the wider society, and by building networks with each other, those people who had those disfavored characteristics or views were able to make common cause with one another, and were able to affect gross social change, massive social change, to the point now where we view some of the ideas that we held in those days not just as wrong, but as a source of shame, as a thing that we need to repudiate and make reparations for. And that is a remarkable set of changes to have made within our lifetime. And the corollary of that is, unless you think that we have attained perfection today, right? Unless you think that in 2071, in 50 years, your grandkids will sit down at the Christmas table with you, say, tell me again, grandma, tell me again, grandpa, how was it that in 2021 we had attained social perfection and haven't had to change any of our social attitudes since? Then you should probably guess that one or more people that you love, you really care about, whose happiness is important to you, and when they're sad, you can't be truly happy, that some of those people have a secret they've never told you. Some of those people have never been their authentic selves with you. And unless we have a private space where they can come forward and tell you that in confidence at the moment and manner of their choosing, then the case won't be that they simply one day throw caution to the wind and announce to the world who they really are. The case is far more likely to be that they'll go to their grave with a great sorrow in their heart. And that part of that sorrow will be down to you, to the fact that they were never able to be their authentic selves with you. And so for that reason, we need to preserve privacy. And if you happen to feel like you were lucky enough to have been born on first base or second base or third base, or maybe even in a slide for home run, and you don't have anything that you need to keep secret, that is the reason you should be using privacy technology. Because as George points out, if the only people who use privacy technologies are the people who have some reason to fear social sanction, then they will experience social sanction for the mere reason of using privacy technologies. We have a duty to each other, to the people we love, to strangers who haven't come yet, who will either be burdened or unburdened of something fundamental about who they are. We have a duty to maintain that privacy. And the way that you and I can maintain that privacy today is by using privacy tools, even when, and especially when, we have nothing to hide.
Thank you, Cory. It has been a wonderful hour with you. I heard you have another call you have to jump off and take. I'm sure we could easily fill another hour with questions, but thank you so much. And we look forward to maybe having you come back and visit with us again, in person, perhaps.
Oh, I would love that. And my leaf blower has arrived right on time.
All right.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Take good
Thanks,
care of
everyone.
yourself. Bye-bye.
Bye.